As some of you know, March is Women's History Month, and every year the National Women's History Project designates a theme for the month, and this year that theme is Our History is Our Strength. So I thought maybe I would tell you today about a couple of women from my family, strong women who inspire me when I think of them to follow their example of strength and faith. The first woman I would like to introduce you to is Joyce. She was born in Wauchula, Florida in the 1920s, and she was born to a family of extremely limited means. From the time she was very, very young, instead of going to school, she went with her families to do agricultural work, and they spent their days picking oranges. Hence the theme. It was hard physical work, needless to say, but she told me once that she was really happy as a child because she didn't know any other life. She didn't know she had anything to be unhappy about, and so she wasn't unhappy. When she was 14, she met a man named George. He was a little bit older than her. He was in the Air Force. He was a really good storyteller, great sense of humor. He was cute, he liked her, yada, yada, yada. You can probably guess where this is going, right? Okay. Well, the miraculous thing about this story, as far as I'm concerned, is that when Joyce told George a few weeks later that she was expecting a baby, he didn't hesitate to step up and take responsibility. He hardly knew her. They had only known each other for a few weeks. But he married her, and they had a baby girl. And shortly after that, George was sent off to fight in World War II. And shortly after that, he was captured and kept as a prisoner of war in Japan. So let's remember that Joyce is maybe 15 years old at this point. She has an infant to care for by herself. She may or may not have a husband when the war is over, and all of this is happening at a time when it's very, very difficult for women to support themselves, much less to support their children. I don't know about you, but it's pretty much impossible for me to imagine how it must have felt to be a young woman in that position at that time. But let's leave Joyce there in Florida for just a moment. I promise we'll come back to her. But I want to talk to you about another woman. Her name is Maxine. She was born in Minnesota in the early 1930s. And she was born into a family that owned a small dairy operation. They were not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, but they owned their home, they owned their farm. Maxine went to school instead of working on that farm, and all of those things were marks of privilege in themselves at that point. But at school, every day, Maxine sat behind a young lady who lived in town, and her family had a little bit more money than most of the people in the area. And Maxine coveted the oranges this girl brought to school every day in her lunch pail. She didn't get to eat much of anything that her family did not produce. So oranges, as you can imagine in Minnesota, were not part of Maxine's regular diet. But she could smell those oranges when the girl was peeling them every day, and she could just imagine that prickly orange taste on her tongue. She loved oranges. But the only time she ever had an orange to eat was at Christmas time, when an orange would show up as if by magic in the toe of her stocking. And then she had to eat that orange knowing that she wasn't going to have another one for a really, really long time. Maxine is my mom, and she used to tell me this story about these oranges when I was a little girl. Anytime she wanted me to appreciate the small blessings in my life, like having something to eat. But like a lot of kids, I was way too busy to appreciate oranges. There were lots of other things I really wanted in my life. As I grew older, though, I came to understand that these small blessings that she was trying to get me to see are really the most important ones, because they're the ones that remind us to have strength and persevere through those really difficult times. The small blessings are the ones that we see. The big blessings, like our health and our family and our homes and our jobs, those are around us every day. Those are just like air. We don't even think about them. The small blessings are the ones that are visible to us. We certainly don't deserve any of those blessings. I know I fall short every day of being the person that I'm sure God wants me to be, but God keeps on blessing me anyway, for some reason. And that is what my mom wanted me to see when she was telling me this story about the oranges. She wanted me to see those blessings that I could hold in my hand every single day. Well, it is possible, not likely, I realize, but possible that one of those oranges in my mother's stocking was picked in Florida by that young girl. You remember Joyce? We started out with Joyce. She's my husband's grandmother. And that baby that she gave birth to when she was 14 years old is my mother-in-law, Jane. Joyce struggled through some really, really difficult years as a young mother. When I asked her once how on earth she survived that time in her life, she said, well, I prayed a lot. And her prayers were answered when George came home at the end of World War II. And they had 4 more children together, another girl, 3 boys. They opened a small property management business. They bought some properties of their own, and they bought 4 more properties of their own. They ended up actually being very wealthy people. But in spite of the fact that she had grown up with so little herself, Joyce was never really a person who was very invested in stuff. She had a lot of it, but it wasn't that important to her. I went to her house once and saw this beautiful silver bowl that she had in her china cabinet. And it was just really simple. It wasn't ornate. It wasn't scrolly. It was just this beautiful, simple bowl. And I told her how much I liked it, how much I admired it. And about a week later, that bowl showed up at my apartment in a gift box. It was just sitting there waiting for me when I came home one day. And when I called her to thank her and say, I wasn't complimenting the bowl, so you give it to me. I hope you know that. She said, well, I know that. She said, but what am I going to do with it? I'm not going to take it with me. I don't think the Lord has much use for silver. It's a good thing to remember, right? The Lord doesn't have much use for silver. So that bowl is one of the most precious things I own, I think. So every year at Christmas, I polish up that silver bowl, and I fill it up with oranges. And I do that to remind my children and myself that there are many, many people in our family history who worked really, really hard so that we can take our lives completely for granted. My children go to school. They don't work in the fields. They complain about going to school, but if they knew the alternative, I suspect they would stop. Maybe. But they don't work in the fields like Joyce did. If any of us want an orange, well, there it is. It's right in front of us. And it's in a silver bowl. How crazy is that? The history of the women in my family is a history of looking forward in faith. Faith that God hears our prayers and will answer them. Faith that God remembers us even when we are in a dark time and start to question that. Faith that God has blessings in store for us that we can't even begin to imagine. Because I'm very certain that 14-year-old girl holding her baby, thinking about her lost husband, never imagined that she was going to own something as beautiful as a silver bowl one day. But God knew that she would. All we have to do to see these blessings God has in store for us is persevere. It's not always easy, but it's all we have to do. Look forward, have faith. That's the strength I draw from the women in my family. That's the strength I draw from that silver bowl full of oranges. Thank you.